Pleasure and honor to be here today. My first experience with APAICS was actually back in 1996. I was an intern in Congress for Congressman Ed Royce, and I attended an APAICS event. And when I was in college, I read all about APAICS, how it was the premier leadership pipeline for Asian Americans. So now to be here today is really to come full circle and is a big honor. And I want to talk a little bit about why I decided to run for office, since I'm going to be posing that question to some of our speakers. And it was a variety of events, one of which was when I first cracked open my world history textbook back in high school, freshman year. And we had just finished covering European history, and we were moving on to Asia, and in particular to China. And the chapter basically opened up and said, for the last 2,000-3,000 years, China had been the most developed civilization in the world. But we're going to start when China was a sick man of Asia. And we kind of just ignored everything else that happened. And I thought, what a shame it was that our children were being shortchanged a truly comprehensive and global education. This is something that you can fix through politics. Then a few years later, my high school band was invited to perform at the local Buddhist temple because we had a very special guest coming to visit, and that was Vice President Al Gore. And what was supposed to be a very joyous occasion for our community actually turned into one of the darker chapters of Asian American history when, after that event and because of some other issues, donors with Asian-sounding last names were basically harassed by the media and by the parties that they had contributed to, and were being questioned about their right to participate in the political process. And this happened right in my backyard. So those are some of the reasons why I decided to run, and I was able to win in large part because of efforts made by people like our keynote speaker, Judy Chu from the San Gabriel Valley, who blazed a path before me and before other people, and fought for the issues that matter to our community. And I am successful in my position today because of organizations like APAICS, which allowed me to participate in the Leadership Academy and allowed me to participate in the Congressional Shadowing Fellowship. So those organizations, like APAICS, I think are incredibly critical. And that's what we're going to discuss today, how we are going to continue to build the national pipeline. And with that, I would like to introduce some of our speakers. We should have another speaker coming shortly. But I would like to begin by introducing City Council Member Ravinder Bhalla. He is a small businessman, and he manages a 4-lawyer law firm with offices in downtown Hoboken and New York and New Jersey. He was included in the 2009 edition of New Jersey Super Lawyers and New Jersey Monthly Magazine as one of those designated as a rising star in the New Jersey legal community. He's been an advocate for the legitimate rights of tenants and landlords, and he served a couple of years as Hoboken's Rent Board Attorney and Special Litigation Counsel for Rent Board Matters, and continues to serve as Union City's tenant advocate. He's currently the elected Democratic committeeman for the 2nd Ward, 3rd District in Hoboken, and I'm very excited to announce, and you're probably one of the first people to hear this, but he has announced his candidacy for State Assembly. So let's give him a round of applause. The next panelist is Mark Keam, and he's the first Korean American elected to the Virginia State House of Delegates. I guess we're kind of close to Virginia. Okay. After receiving a law degree from Hastings College of the Law, Delegate Keam worked for the Federal Communications Commission and helped implement portions of the landmark Telecommunications Act of 1996. And in 1998, Delegate Keam became Assistant Chief Counsel in the Office of Advocacy within the Small Business Administration. In 2001, he worked for Senator Dick Durbin as his Chief Counsel. Then after 12 years of government service in both the executive and legislative branch, Delegate Keam joined Verizon Communications as the Senior Advisor, where he helps develop public policy ideas that promote the use of technology to solve societal problems. And I've known Delegate Keam through some other events, and I'm proud to say that I actually walked a couple of precincts for him in his very beautiful district. So he has a very nice area that he represents. And with that, I would like to turn it over to the panelists. And the first question that I want to pose to them would be basically, was there an event, a singular moment that inspired you to run for office? What was that? And what was your path to elected office? And we'll start with City Council Member Ravinder Bhalla.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you to APAICS for having this event and having me join you to participate in this panel. And as he had stated, I believe that one of the missions of APAICS is to assist local elected officials take that next step to statewide office. So I feel it's appropriate that I'm here today now as a candidate for statewide office in New Jersey. The reason I decided to run for office, truthfully, is unrelated to my identity as an Asian American. It was simply a situation that we had in Hoboken where our property owners were hit with a 47% tax increase, which we felt was unconscionable in 1 year, which was the result of simply gross mismanagement of our municipal finances over the course of a decade. I have been an active observer of the manner in which local elected officials were conducting the affairs of the city of Hoboken. I was keenly attuned to the local politics, and I felt like I was well qualified to serve in Hoboken, and I felt like it was necessary to raise the bar in terms of what it meant to be a council member within Hoboken. I will be honest, I was not running as an Asian American candidate. I was running as a candidate who happened to be Asian American. There's a very small Asian American population within Hoboken. It's a largely white population, Caucasian population. There's about 12% Latino, but the number of Asian Americans is about 2% or thereabouts. So, people, when I first ran, told me, they asked me how many Indians live in Hoboken and how many Asians live in Hoboken and where are you going to get your votes from? I did not know at the time, but what I came to learn, the eventual result was that out of 12 candidates running for 3 spots, I received the highest number of votes. When people in the beginning said that you can't do it unless you're going to get your base from the Italian community or the Hispanic community or labor or seniors, that you had to fit a certain demographic, and I was told that I didn't fit that demographic to be successful. But what I learned from the experience was that Hoboken is, there's a concept called crossover communities, and crossover communities are known as communities that might not have a high minority population, but because of the demographics, they're more inclined to consider a minority as their elected official based on merit or other reasons. So I just did my best, knocked on doors, bus stops, a lot of voter contact, phone banking, all the things that you need to do to run a successful campaign. And I was, I guess, a combination of hard work, luck, and timing. I was able to have an opportunity to serve.
Thank you very much. Delegate Keam?
Sorry, I was busy twittering. Good afternoon, everyone. I guess it is afternoon, yeah. And for those of you who are not from this area, welcome to Washington, D.C. and the National Capital Region. And for those who are from here, welcome to my home area. This is Northern Virginia. It's just across the river from here. And my district, the 35th district that I represent in the General Assembly, is about 20 miles due west of here on the 66, right at the Vienna and Dunleary metro stations. And so for a lot of my friends who are from outside of Washington, D.C., who I talk to about my campaign and my politics, and a lot of the times they ask you, where is your district, and try to have a sense of where the geography is. I've told them, and this may or may not be true, but and my friend Susan Lee, if she's here, I think might be able to correct me, but I may be the Asian American that has the closest elected district to the Washington, D.C. capital region, or at least the capital itself, which would make me, outside of our friends like Mike Honda and Judy Chu and others, the closest local Asian American elected official here. And so I always feel like I have to welcome folks to Washington, D.C., even though my district isn't quite here. It's a few miles out. But the reason I ran for office is actually because all these years of living and working in Washington, D.C., I've never made the front page of Asian Fortune. I just walked in, I just saw this, and this is amazing, To be right next to a good-looking guy, Daniel Day Kim, right below the president's brother-in-law, right next to a golfer. I mean, this is wonderful. I guess that must be a sign of success or something. But if Chen is here, good work. Thanks. All kidding aside, one of the reasons I decided to run for office 2 years ago when I ran and was honored to be successful was for about 20 years of my in the previous to running for office, I'd been involved in campaigns and politics. Like many of you, I was interested in politics both from an academic perspective as a political science major, and I also went to law school as well. So you get a sense of what the government is supposed to be, the policy-making, legislative process is supposed to be, based on what you learn in textbooks and case law studies and all. But I've always been more interested in carrying that out in real life, and not just taking the theory of politics and government, but seeing if it really applies to real life, and in particular to us as the non-traditional Americans. Does the promises contained in the Constitution and all the things that we talk about and revere as Americans, do they really hold true for all of us, or is it only just for some of us? And so I've always tested that theory in practical ways by doing grassroots campaigning and volunteering and working in Congress and doing a number of other things that are in and around politics. But I've never actually run for office before until 2 years ago. And it came down to a couple of reasons. One, from a personal decision-making was, I felt that, I have had a chance, I've been honored to have a chance to serve in a number of different positions in government, in politics, and volunteering and such. And as somebody who came to the United States as a teenager, for a naturalized American, I thought, this is a great country. I've had a chance to do all these things. I wonder if I can even go as far as being elected. And so from a personal perspective, it was a curiosity of, can I do this, and is there a room for somebody like me? Hey, Susan. But the professional side of me was that, looking around, we've had wonderful Asian American candidates in the past. There's still a lot of Korean Americans in particular, and Asian Americans who are just outstanding in their professional backgrounds and are successful in so many ways, and yet they're not applying themselves in politics. They're not even applying themselves to public office. And I felt that with my background and my professional experiences, if people like me weren't willing to take the stand and step up and say, hey, I'm going to try this as well, it'd be kind of hypocritical for me to turn around and say, hey, you've got all the right credentials, why don't you run for office as well? So I wanted to be able to say, look, if a guy like me can do this, you've got a lot more, you went to better schools than I, you've had better experiences, you were born in the United States, you have all these other factors that might make you even more successful. So in some ways I wanted to be a test case for myself. And like all of us, we need some inspiration. It's one thing to say, yeah, I want to try this and see if I can do this. It's another thing to actually have role models and mentors and examples that you can follow. And for me, and this isn't a criticism of my own community of Korean Americans, but more of a historic, factual perspective, which is one of the saddest parts of how I grew up here was I had very, very little, if any, Korean American mentors in politics. There just weren't any. We know about former Congressman Keam. He made history in 1992 as the first Korean American member of Congress. But that's it. And we've had very few Korean Americans at state and local levels that have actually succeeded. And the ones that have succeeded, a couple of terms later, they're not around anymore. And they weren't there to really mentor the next generation. And so my mentors were people like Norm Mineta, Bob Matsui, Danny Akaka, Daniel Inouye, so many other wonderful people, Hiram Fong, and many other Asian American leaders have come before us. But more recently, my inspiration and my role model was Barack Obama. I had a chance to work with him when he came to Washington in 2004. I actually worked on his campaign when he ran for the Senate, thanks to my being at the right place at the right time, working for Senator Durbin at the time. And so when President Obama decided to run for president in 2007, I had a chance to work on his campaign and from the very beginning of this process. And so watching him as somebody who people said, this guy has no chance, skinny kid with a funny name coming from Illinois, there's no way in the world this guy with his background can be the president of the United States. And yet, working with him and watching the progress and seeing how the nation changed and the attitudes of voters changed along the way and the public perception changed, gave me a sense of confidence in ways that it's hard to grasp, but gave me the sense that, hey, if he can do it, yes, we can. I can do it too. And if I can do it, dang, all of us can do it. And so it was this attitude of, let's take this idea of change and hope that he's talked about, and don't take it into an academic, let's change the White House, but let's change all of our lives, all the way down to the state and local levels. And so that was really the final final push that I had in 2008 to decide to run. So in 2009, I launched my campaign, and here I am.
Thank you, Delegate Keam. We're now joined by Delegate Susan Lee, and she was a classmate of mine at the Leadership Academy. And she's been involved in numerous professional, civic, and political organizations for over 25 years and is a co-founder and former board member of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus Institute. And her service includes being the co-chair of the Multicultural Community Partnership of the NAACP, the Montgomery County branch, a member of the Western Montgomery County Citizens Advisory Board, and a current board member of Progressive Maryland. Delegate Lee is also a former president of the Asian Pacific American Bar Association of the Greater Washington area, and she's a member of the Organization of Chinese Americans, Chinese American Citizens Alliance, and the League of Korean Americans of Maryland. And if you could, Delegate Lee, if you could just talk a little bit about what inspired you to run for office, if there were any specific events, and what was your path to office?
Yeah, thank you, Jane. I'm so delighted to be here with everyone. I feel like I'm amongst friends, and some of you I've had histories with. I see Daphne Kwok in there, who's now a hoity-toity White House official, and also I'm delighted to be here with Mark and Ravinder. They really achieved and really laid the foundation for others to run for office or to get involved in politics. Just as an information, I serve in the Maryland House of Delegates. I'm also part of the House leadership. I'm a deputy majority whip, and I serve on the House Judiciary Committee. I'm vice chairman of my county's delegation from Montgomery. Anybody here from Montgomery County, Maryland? All right, woo-hoo! Well, my district is mostly Bethesda, it's little Chevy Chase, Rockville, Potomac. I see Officer Lou there, and bits and parts of Montgomery County, but I'm really proud to represent that district. And I also am the House Chair of the Nanobiotechnology Task Force, as well as the ID Theft Task Force. And I was just recently elected last year to be the president of our General Assembly's Women's Caucus. So I see a lot of women out there, all right. And I hope that some of you will also follow in politics too. But you know, getting there was not easy. Being elected to office, it's not an easy task, as Ravinder and Mark and Jay have told you. It's like establishing a foundation and base. And just for your information, my district is predominantly white. It has the smallest percentage of minorities in the entire Montgomery County. But one good thing about that district, it has the highest voter turnout, and it has the highest levels of education of any district in the entire state of Maryland. And it's got about over 110,000 voters. So voters who actually read your campaign literature, you have to know what you're talking about half the time, and more than that. And so you got to be up on the issues. When I went out there and campaigned, I told them that you're getting 3 for 1. You're not just getting someone who grew up in the area and understands those issues in that area, in that district, but also I'm coming from a perspective, from a woman's point of view, as well as Asian American and minority. And so the General Assembly could benefit by having all those 3 perspectives and come up with good laws that can really empower our community, all communities. And I think that's why I went into politics, because I wanted to provide a vehicle to empower our different communities. I've always worked in the AAPI community, as well as Latino and African American community. As Jay said, I was part of the NAACP. And I also worked very hard in the Democratic Party, both locally and in my state. And I was the first chairperson of the Coalition of Asian American Democrats of the state of Maryland. I see Alex there, he was part of our group too, and so is Vincent. It was the first and largest AAPI Democratic organization in the state. And we wanted it to be something more than just, taking photo ops with presidents and senators and all that. We wanted to make a difference, so we worked very hard to raise the credibility and visibility of APAs in our state. And that applies also to whatever party you are, because I'm sure there are some Republicans here, and I think you probably have done the same in the Republican Party. But by the time we were done, KPAD MD is the name of the organization, we were able to have a real political base in not just Montgomery County, but Maryland. And it provided me a base and foundation to be elected to the what they call the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee, which is like the big political machine in Montgomery County. And that enabled me to be able to run and win my election when a vacancy came up. But again, it's not easy because in my district, there is the seat that I ran for, there was never, ever a minority that was able to elect it to that district. And so I was really nervous. You know, outside I look cool, calm, collected, you know, yeah, I'm cool. But boy, I was falling apart, going to pieces. And I'm sure Mark and Ravinder and Jay probably had the same experiences when you first ran. After the first term, it's, oh yeah, let's cruise. You know, it's not so bad. But it's kind of intimidating because we're at the forefront, we're at the brink of something new. Our communities experience the fastest rates of growth next to Latinos and African Americans, not just in our different states, but particularly Maryland, but also the United States. So we got an opportunity to get more active in the political process and really make a difference and run and get elected. And that's what we did. So, like I said, it hasn't been easy. And I've always done coalition politics. You can't get elected just by getting support from the AAPI community. You got to make alliances and coalitions, Latinos, African Americans, women's organizations, labor groups, civic, faith, everybody, because it takes a coalition to get elected, and particularly I think that's the case in Maryland. And you got to give and take. Sometimes it's not your issue, but you got to get involved in it because it helps. And you know, that has always helped me after I got elected too. That's why I've been able to pass some pretty good bills that have helped our community. But I think that for the future, for us to be able to succeed, we need to continue that coalition building because I think that works. And I think one thing that I did as president of the Women's Caucus this year, we have a lot of women. We have 31% women in General Assembly. Yeah, thank goodness. Yeah, women. We joined forces with the New American Caucus, which is composed of Asian, Latino, African American, and other immigrant groups, Russian, Jewish. And we joined forces, New Americans Coalition, the Women's Caucus, and the Black Caucus, to come together to strategize, to support common bills so that we could get it passed. And this year, we not only passed bills to help increase procurement opportunities for minorities, including our group, and also bills to fight racial profiling and discrimination. This year, we passed both chambers, and it was the hardest thing we ever did, the Maryland Dream Act. So I'm glad you know what that is. Because I think it's a matter of fairness. You know, a lot of us, some of it are those that came before us, especially Chinese Americans. There was the Chinese Exclusionary Act. And those who know APAI history is that we didn't even get a chance to participate in a legal way. And I see this DREAM Act as a way to let the best and brightest be able to succeed, get an education, and pay back to their community, become taxpayers, right? So when we were trying to make the appeal, there were some delegates and senators who got up and talked about how moral, yes, it is a moral issue. But I spoke about how it's a good economic issue. Because a lot of the great innovators in technology and IT and biotech that have changed and improved the quality of our lives have come from our immigrant communities, right? There's Keam, who spearheaded an electronics revolution. He came from the University of Maryland. He was an immigrant, lived in Maryland. And he was the head of Bell Labs, and he came up with some pretty good innovations. And later on, he came back. Thank goodness he moved back to Maryland. He's in the district adjoining me, darn it. But he donated millions of dollars to build a state-of-the-art engineering department building at the University of Maryland. So he's an example of giving back. And can you imagine, even though these kids who, through no fault of their own, came across the border when they were little babies, and then they're the best and brightest in our state, but they can't get into state tuition. What are they going to do? Are they going to go into crime or other things to use their talents? No. We need to help those individuals succeed. It's a fairness issue. So anyway, that's an example of things that we have done to help empower our community. We need to be participants, not spectators. Otherwise, the world's going to go by and we're not going to be able to help us, our families, our children. So anyway, thank you for the honor and privilege of letting me come here to speak to you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I'd like to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions. If anyone has any questions, feel free to come up to any of the 3 microphones, and we will give you an opportunity.
I'm Vinh Kam, I'm the president of Vietnamese American Coalition. I have to say that I was so happy to see such a young crop of politicians, so eloquent and so highly educated. And I want to refer some of the points you made. I have like a couple comments and one observation. The first one, when we Asian Americans run for office, this is a question in our mind. Who is our constituency? Is it our own ethnic group, or is it the community where we live? Way back, year 2000 when Gore lost the election, if you remember, at that time, I was in Vietnam with President Clinton and the whole team. And I was an appointee in biochemical warfare issues. Now, when I was there, every day we were hoping that Gore would win, but finally he didn't make it. So when I came back home, I was devastated, like so many of us in this room. And I saw an article in the Greenwich Times saying that Greenwich representative town meeting has very few minorities. And I happened to live in a district which was heavily Republican. And I never ran for office before, although I campaigned for a lot of people. And like some of you had mentioned, I wanted to test my case, and I wanted to run and look into the requirements, what it took to run. I just filed by the deadline. I spent about roughly under $200 to do my resume, a very short resume, and some kind of appeal to my constituency, appealing to the quality of life. So my main thing was, I want to improve the quality of all people. And I found what helped me was my background in the environmental field. I had extensive background there. And I was very heavily involved in my community, being the board of the YWCA and a volunteer for a bunch of other groups. So when I was campaigning all these Republicans, they asked me tough questions. How did I deal with embryonic cell tissue research? What happened with Clinton and all that? But I would just be frank, I tried to stay away from being Democrat or Republican because I was a Democrat, which was a very small amount in Greenwich. And I straightly went into the issues that matter to everyday people: pollution, the cost of housing, asbestos abatement, and so forth. And believe it or not, I made it. And what I did, I actually dropped a letter at each house intentionally. I didn't want to send a letter so that way I knew people. So people even call me up and say, I would vote for you. I didn't run again because I felt there was so much to learn. I was probably more effective at some other areas. The town was very rich. They probably didn't need me. The first time I sat in, I was the only non-white in the group. I felt I was a little bit, maybe I was in the wrong group or something. But going back to this group, when you all said you were running as an American citizen who happened to be an Asian American, And I really could relate to that. We should run on that basis and not on any other thing. The second point was, there are some expectations from our own community. What do we do for our own ethnic group? Maybe some of this could relate to that. The third point is a very delicate issue, and I've been frank about this. I feel that I've been a Democrat all my life, but I feel our vote has been taken for granted by the Democratic parties. Whereas the Republicans really make a more aggressive outreach to minority communities. I don't know the details about other communities, but I know for Vietnamese American community, they were extremely aggressive in going to California and reach out with all groups. And President Bush really nominated a much higher number of Vietnamese Americans in his administration compared to, the Clinton administration. So this is another comment I want to, and I really want to thank Daphne and I don't know how to call him now. He has so many titles, but he was a pioneer, and I happened to be with him in Vietnam, and he made such a beautiful speech, extremely inspiring. So thank you for everyone being here, and again, we have a lot to do with the upcoming election.
Thank you very much. If you'd like to address that?
Good answer. Thank you for your 3 comments. I think you have to start getting involved. I know what you're talking about because years ago before I ran, and probably it's one of the things that motivated me to run, we had heard that a former elected official said that Asians don't matter because they never vote. And that got me so incensed I couldn't see straight, okay? And I knew I had a mission, and I proved him wrong, obviously. And that's the reason why we created Coalition of Asian American Democrats of Maryland. And let me tell you, you all have to, the community has to do this. You can't wait for the party to come and court you, because they're not, okay? Democrats and Republicans are not going to do that. You got to take an active role in whatever. If you're a Republican, get back to the Republican Party. If you're a Democrat, get back to the Democratic Party, which is what we did in Maryland. We channeled our money, our votes, and everything. We kept the candidates accountable. We even ran some of our own people. One of my role models is Kumar Garve, who was one of the first. He and Delegate David Rama ran. No one at a time when they never thought any APAs could win or even run. But they did. But we also engaged in massive voter education and registered record number of AAPIs. And we also did a considerable amount of fundraising, because nothing gets a politician's attention than money, right? Right, guys? So, because it takes money to run. And when you raise a lot of money, it not only scares off your competition, but it shows you out. Asians are, when they give money, and they give a lot of it, it means they're serious. And that's what we did. And I think that's what you got to do, even though it's Republican. Did you win your Democratic primary?
No, there was no primary, basically.
Was it a Board of Education, something
No,
to see?
it was a representative committee. It's something that go into the council in New York or something.
Well, one of the problems we have, in my district, it's a 2-to-1 Democrat, thank goodness, because I'm a Democrat. And so the primary is extremely important. But one thing I found is that a lot of Asian AAPIs are not voting in the primary. They may be registered, but they wait until the general. By the time general comes along, it's all over. And you got to win a primary to even be in the general. So that's a challenge that we have in our Maryland community, is getting them out to the primary, because the general, it's a done deal already.
Great. I want to ask Ravi, since you are now moving from a council member position onto a state assembly position, you mentioned that you ran as someone who just happened to be of South Asian descent. Do you find that now that you're running for a larger race, are you going to be changing your approach and reaching out more to some of the more ethnic components?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And now I'm in a position where I'm running not for local elected office, but state office within the 33rd Legislative District of New Jersey. And because of the census, which triggered a redrawing of the legislative maps in New Jersey, those maps came out on April 4th, and it all of a sudden put me in a district where I could be competitive and could be successful as a candidate for state assembly. The district also now includes a high percentage of Asian American voters. So the Jersey City, which has a large number of Indians, Vietnamese, Filipinos, they're all within this district that I'm running in. So to go to your comment about the fact that I was running not as an Asian American, but somebody who happens to be Asian American, the messaging has to be different in this particular race. So when I go within those communities of Jersey City that are highly populated with Asians, part of my message is going to be that at the state level, we're underrepresented in the state legislature. The population of Asian Americans in New Jersey is 8%, but out of 120 state legislators, we only have 2 Asian Americans out of 120, even though we have a population of almost 10%. So we're underrepresented at the state level, and part of the messaging within this newly created district, which has a high percentage of Asian Americans, is that this is a chance to elevate an Asian American and increase or address the underrepresentation of Asian Americans within the district. So I do plan on advocating for my candidacy partially on that basis.
And you can also convey that you're bringing something extra. You not only understand those local issues where you're represented, but you're bringing that new perspective. You're bringing more of a reality to the state legislature. And I think that's the message you're probably conveying right now.
Thank you. We are running a little short of time, but I wanted to give Delegate Mark Keam a chance to say something. I actually see him as much in Los Angeles as I do in DC. So, he kind of represents a candidate that doesn't just tap into the ethnic population in his community, but also nationwide. And I wondered if you could just expound upon how he has utilized the national network of Korean Americans and other AAPIs.
Well, sure, thanks, Jay, and I recognize one of my biggest heroes in life, Tammy Duckworth, is here, so I want to make sure that we wrap up as quickly as possible, so maximize the time that you have with her and others following after this panel. But the question, ma'am, and the thoughts that you all have, this is something that we as Asian American candidates and elected officials have to grapple with all the time. And I might say that most people of color will have to deal with that. But it's a little bit more pronounced for Asian Americans because of our lack of history, and the history that we have in politics hasn't necessarily been all positive in terms of, and we all know this from many, many years of civil rights movement, of us being seen as foreigners, and you're not really from here, and where are you really from, and all that we talk about. What I did in my campaign, knowing full well that I'm the first Asian American running for a state rep outside of one of the gentlemen who ran about 10 years ago in Virginia who didn't win, and also, even though my Fairfax County has a number of Asian Americans now, population is growing. My district, it was very predominantly a white, Caucasian, and very conservative town. Vienna is an extremely conservative town. And so I decided to actually address that issue head on, my identity. Who am I? Why am I running? And what can I do that others can't do for you? And the example I use a lot is, as I mentioned before, I'm a Korean immigrant. And we have a lot of military veterans in Virginia. We have about 1 out of 10 voters in Virginia is somehow related with the military, either as a veteran or as a contractor or some other type of employment. And so a number of houses that you go up to knock on the door, there's going to be a flag, there might be a Marine flag, there might be a sticker, it's the Army. There's some symbol that tells you that this person, he or she is a military family. And a lot of times, not to stereotype, but they tend to be more conservative especially on social issues, and they may be Republicans. We don't, in Virginia, by the way, unlike Maryland, we don't have registration by party, so we can't tell just by the name whether he or she is a Republican or Democrat. But what I did was, every time I knocked on the door, and as the conversation started, they either assume that they'll look at me as an Asian American walking up to their door, they'll think, did we order Chinese tonight? Or either that, or they might say, who's this guy? He might be a volunteer for somebody else, but they don't necessarily think that I'm the candidate. So I'll knock on the door, and somebody will walk up and say, yes, and I'll say, hi, how you doing? My name is Mark Keam. I'm a candidate running for the House of Delegates in Virginia, and I'm here to ask for your support because, or whatever it might be the original pitch. The first thing they notice is that I don't have an accent, or at least I don't think I have one. And so originally, when you start the conversation, I think their perception of an Asian immigrant walking up to their door slightly changes the moment I open my mouth, and I don't dress weird. I dress like any other candidate. And second thing I do is, as soon as I talk to them, I'll talk about how, sir, I noticed that I noticed the flag, or I noticed the sticker on your car, and I'm assuming that you've worn the uniform, and if so, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your service. And they'll look at you and they'll say, well, can I tell you, I was born in Korea, and I wouldn't be standing here in front of your door today if it wasn't for the American soldiers that came and saved my parents from their certain death and our nation. And you can use that example across the world where American soldiers have gone out there and done exactly what we want them to do, which is to protect our freedom and democracy. And because of that, I'm here. Because of that, I'm a naturalized citizen. Because of that, I'm so proud of being an American that I want to represent you in Richmond. They'll look at you and like, wow, I wasn't expecting that. A super patriot from an Asian American immigrant. And so I think there are ways that we can play on our backgrounds, on our foreignness, if you will, our identity and our ethnicity, in a way that we can really play that story of, this is the America that I am creating for ourselves. I'm not taking somebody else's definition of what an Asian American should be. I'm not taking your view of what an immigrant should be. I'm telling you what my view of being an immigrant and a minority and an Asian is, but I'm also telling you where we're going to go as a future, because the Commonwealth's future and the nation's future isn't going to be dictated by what's happened over the last 200 years. It's going to be dictated by those in this room now, and those of us who are all working to make the future a common one. So when you can convince people that I'm the right person, regardless of my background, my ancestry, my looks, my gender, anything else, because I've got the right vision, but I also have the attitude that this is our nation and we work together, if you can kind of convince one voter at a time to do that, it doesn't really matter what the press says, it doesn't really matter what the stereotype is. Every campaign comes down to two things: voter contact and funding. And if you can do both in a way that you're really targeting the people that are going to support you, then I think Asian Americans, like any American, ought to be able to be successful in any part of the world. And I've proven it in a very conservative place in Virginia. Hope the rest of you can do that in places where it's a little bit more friendlier.
Thank you, Delegate Keam. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. There's a wealth of information that all of these panelists can share, and I'm sure they'd be thrilled to speak with you on a one-to-one basis. But right now, we need to move on to our next panelists. So with that, please give all of our panelists another round of applause.